So LEVAN Saganishvili and Gerry Kydyrgali recently went on the Core Sports podcast with Coach Ray and with Adam Silver. And during this, LEVAN was asked a question about his motivation, and he ends up saying that he thinks Gerry Kydyrgali is actually potentially the very toughest opponent he's ever going to have, at least thus far in his professional career. And he said that he probably does have somewhat of a weakness toward a flop press, if he's completely honest. So I figured what better way to talk about this than to look at Hermes versus LEVAN. And I do think that Gerry at least poses a very different threat than a lot of people have so far. So I'm super excited about this match just because of the unknown factor. I really have no idea what could happen. Of course, I'm considering LEVAN to be the heavy on paper favorite because he always is, but you never really know what could happen. And LEVAN has potentially shown some weaknesses toward a flop press. This has happened way back against Gennady Quigvinya, but of course, most notably during Hermes Gasparini. And we see that in this match, Hermes is not quite in a flop press, but he is in a flop move. And because he has allowed his wrist to go back, or rather it was taken, he has actually made this match arm on arm. There's kind of two ways to get the match arm on arm. You could either force your opponent into a hook by bending your wrist in one direction, but you can also bend your wrist in the opposite direction, and you kind of achieve the same thing. Hermes has kind of taken the match out of the hand and wrist, and now it's arm on arm. It's his side pressure versus LEVAN's bicep and his side pressure, and he's not quite able to pin, and Hermes is attempting to isolate LEVAN's elbow flexor here, and he starts to work through it, and he starts to open it, and you see these little movements every time Hermes is peeling LEVAN's bicep open, and he's filling it with blood, and he's putting little tears into that muscle, just like if you were doing a slow eccentric curl, you're getting ripped through. That's damaging LEVAN's elbow flexor as far as the round, as far as the super match goes, and it's going to make him gas out quicker than Hermes is because LEVAN is using musculature and Hermes is using his bone structure. So of course, stylistically, and a lot of the reason this is happening too, it's not because LEVAN isn't necessarily strong enough, but LEVAN is just so massive, it's really difficult for him to do some kind of transitional move from here. His bicep is so massive, his pectoral muscle is so massive, just like watching someone like Georgi Tsvetkov. A lot of these super heavy guys have a really difficult time trying to transition to a press and just trying to finish the match. They end up falling way off the table, they get super low, and it's just because they can't really get very tight to their body. And right here in this moment, no, it's not this one, it's a little bit later, Hermes is going to do one more surge, and it's right when LEVAN goes for a pin attempt. Right after this, Hermes comes up, and I think right here, you can see LEVAN's arm getting opened pretty significantly, and you can see the struggle on his face, and LEVAN ends up fouling off the back. I think if he didn't foul, or if this was running fouls, probably Hermes is going to get a pin here. So I think it's clear that out of everything that's been tried in the last little while, Devin did have some success through the hand, but it didn't look like he was close to getting a pin. The closest person to getting a pin, I think, is definitely Hermes Gasparini, and it was in this flop press lane. And we have seen LEVAN even struggle way back in the day, like I said, against Gennady Quigvinya in a flop press lane. A lot of that is because of his size, and it's also because of his style. So potentially you would think that Hermes Gasparini, if he's someone who doesn't even specialize in the flop press, he kind of just pulled this out of nowhere, just all about his heart in this moment. You would think that someone like Gerry Kydyrgali, who does specialize in the flop press and has done it his entire career, might just have the very best chance against LEVAN out of anyone. And I think that there is something to say about that. I think that that's definitely potentially the case. However, as we know, this isn't necessarily as straightforward as this, and I think there's also a lot of problems for Gerry. And the biggest problem I see for Gerry is this moment right here, where Hermes does not open the match in a flop press, but rather he opens in a top roll. So LEVAN can't pull Hermes in the same way that he potentially could pull Gerry in. LEVAN has to go outside. If LEVAN just tried to contain Hermes here, if he just tried to grab him low and bend his wrist, Hermes is going to top roll LEVAN. So he can't do that. LEVAN has to keep that high knuckle position, and he has to go outside. And because LEVAN is going outside, that's what's making him vulnerable to this flop press move. So both guys go outside, and Hermes is still, even if it's not an ideal position, he's still challenging LEVAN's wrist to a certain degree. There's a lot of back pressure, a lot of pressure going this way, being applied into Levan's fingertips. So Levan is not in an ideal position to go sideways. He had to go outside because Hermes was going outside, and only once Hermes goes outside first does he then come up and transition to this flop press move. And Hermes talked about this before. He said that on one round, he did just try to go right into the flop press, and it didn't work at all. It gave Levan all the access he needed to his power. So this is kind of the big difference. Sure, Levan has struggled against a flop press. However, as far as I'm aware, and someone correct me in the comments if this is not the case, I don't remember any match where Levan ever struggled against someone who opened in a flop press. I remember multiple matches where he struggled in some sort of war, and then his opponent eventually transitioned to a flop press, and that works. But I'd never remember a match where he struggled against someone who opens in a flop press, where their ace move is a flop press. So because of that, I'm not sure exactly what this match is going to look like. I think there's a very high possibility that Levan is simply able to grab Jerry a little bit lower on his wrist and just cup him in, destroy Jerry's pronation, and just go right through him in a hook. I think that there's a very high likelihood of that. But like Levan said, there is a lot of potential if Jerry can time the go perfectly, if Jerry can somehow find a way to isolate that bicep. Jerry doesn't need to be here, but he needs to get Levan onto the B side of the table in a position like this, or at least in some sort of position where he has access to Levan's elbow flexor. That's going to be the name of the game for Jerry. And if he can isolate that elbow flexor, Jerry has really good efficiency, so it translates to really good endurance. I think he has really good chances, but he's going to have to find a way to stop the match. Hermes found a way to stop the match by going outside first and then transitioning. I don't think that Jerry can do that. So let me know what you guys think about this. I think it's an interesting take, and of course, Levan would know more out of anyone who his toughest opponent is going to be, and he said he thinks it's going to be Jerry out of everyone that he's faced so far. And I also understand that he's probably trying to hype the match up to a certain degree as well. But let me know what you guys think about this. Do you agree that Levan's toughest opponent he's going to have so far, at least stylistically, is Jerry Kydyrgali? Or do you think it's going to be someone more like Hermes or potentially Michael Todd or Gennady Kvikvinya, who has a lot more options? You really never know what could potentially happen with a match like this. Jerry is very fast for someone that's his size. So even if he gets flash pinned maybe 1 or 2 or even 3 times, there's always that chance that he catches the go just perfectly. He bumps Levan outside his shoulder, and once he gets that position, he might just be able to drag Levan out into deep water and just slowly drown him, and Levan might totally gas out. And even if it's because of multiple mistakes, there's always a chance that Jerry could win this match.